Hi, and welcome back to Project Chana Power Hour. Each week we get together to learn and strengthen ourselves in our special mitzvahs of Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras HaMishpacha, as well as other halachas that are pertinent to women. Our goal is to prepare ourselves in our homes to welcome Mashiach. Tonight's learning is dedicated L'Zchus Menucha Rachel Bas Chaviva Perel. May she be benched with health and revealed brachas, Begashmias, Baruchnias. If you would like to dedicate a class in honor or zchus of someone, please reach out via our email, projectchanapowerhouse@gmail.com. Please join us afterwards for Tzedakah, Tehillim, and the Mashiach thought. Okay, so let's get started. For our first class of Hilchos Shabbos, we will be having a special class this week on the davening we say on Shabbos. We'll explore the meaning, halachas, and minhagim behind it with Rabbi Braun. Rabbi Braun is the Morozow of Crown Heights. Thank you so much for making time to be on our program.
Okay, one thing I see about this class, Baruch Hashem, that we don't want to waste even a moment of learning Torah. So although the class is called for 8:30, but all the introductions happen from 8:28 onwards. And we actually start the class at 8:30, which is amazing to see how people are getting to be able to learn Torah. It was announced this is a special class about the tefillas of Shabbos. I'm actually very excited about this class. And I'm going to start just with Mincha and Erev Shabbos, and maybe we'll have time and touch on Kabbalah Shabbos. But there's a lot more to be said, both about the content of the tefillah and what it's about, and of course the halachas associated with it. And being that this coming week is Shabbos Mevarchem El, it's Erev Chodesh El. El is the month where the tshuva wind blows. The wind of tshuva is blowing. It's a time that we dedicate much more time for tefillah than for learning. In Sfarim it's brought, and the Rebbe quoted this very, very often from the Sefer Birkei Yosef. Many sichos the Rebbe brings from the Birkei Yosef, the Chidah, that brings from an earlier Kabbalah Sefer, that it's much more important these days to spend time in our davening than learning. And he writes that he saw quite a few Rabbanim that were always involved with their books and with the halacha stuff, but it came the month of El, they would drop a partial amount of their learning and to spend more time on tachnunim, on prayer and supplication. So it's a good time to think about our tefillas. The Rebbe wrote in a letter that he has no time to look in depth into particular halachic lamda shemada because it's Chodesh El, and he brings this from this Sefer Birkei Yosef. Now, the Birkei Yosef seemingly is talking more about slichas, that among Sfardim was very common that they say slichas throughout the entire month of El. But the Rebbe talks also about how we should spend more time in our avodas hatefillah. It is also a time for Torah. There are sichas that talk about that, how it's important to learn Torah. After all, on Rosh Chodesh El, Moshe Rabbeinu went to receive the second set of luchos, and the Melech Basada, the Rebbe explains, is also through learning Torah. So what we're doing right now is actually limud Torah about tefillah. So that's the perfect combination. So as we mentioned, we're going to start off with Mincha Erev Shabbos. Now, a lot of ladies don't daven Mincha every single day. Some people have difficulties even with Shachris. Ideally, the mitzvah of tefillah applies to men and to women equally. And women should be davening at least the Shmoneh Esrei of Shachris and the Shmoneh Esrei of Mincha. Might have is a reshus, might have is optional. Men have accepted it as a chayv, as an obligation. Women have not, although Shabbos is very different. Shabbos, we don't work. And Shabbos, some personalists actually even say that the tefillah of Shabbos is an obligation even for women. But I'm talking about Friday. Friday is a very, very busy day. And if people manage to do the Shachar, great. But to go and manage to do the Mincha too, that seems like sometimes an impossible task. But there's a lot to be said about the beauty of davening and Mincha. The very last Mincha of the week before we go into Shabbos. And to do that Mincha in such a way that we're all set and ready for Shabbos, and this is our last tefillah, finishing off the days of the week and now getting ready for Shabbos, especially the women that are the primary players in the mitzvah of Heichinu es Asher Yaviu, the mitzvah of preparing for Shabbos. It's a mitzvah equally for men and women, but we see the reality is that Akeres Abayis is often the one that's involved in the purchasing for Shabbos and making the food for Shabbos, etc. And now comes the tefillah connected with Shabbos. Now, Sfarim tell us that we should be putting extra effort into our Mincha on Friday. In Sifrei Kabbalah talks about the great mile of this tefillah, that the Olamais, the higher worlds, start having an elevation on Shabbos. The worlds start becoming niskal zeh. One world goes up to another higher world. That already happens already from the time of Tfilas Mincha. That's a time when the great revelations of Shabbos happen in Shamayim, and of course happens down here as well. In Sfarim it says, but in Sifrei Chassidus, And this tefillah is a tikkun for the entire week. It's a good idea, and this is brought down in halachas for them, that we should actually daven mincha on Friday earlier than the rest of the week. We want to manage to accept Shabbos early. We want to show that we're happy with Shabbos. We don't wait for Shabbos at the very last minute to welcome our Shabbos. So mincha, which is still the Friday thing, and we don't push it off mincha for the last minute. And we'll talk about the halachic aspects of those who have difficulty, a challenge with mincha and candle lighting. But we want to daven the mincha earlier with simcha and later accept Shabbos. So how do we start off the tefillah of mincha on Friday? The very first thing in our siddur is hoidu. Hoidu, which is a kapitel in Tehillim, Kuv Zayin. You might know, you might not know, that in some siddurim the hoidu it's not even found there. And some people want to say that the very first siddur that included hoidu on a Friday, the very first printed siddur was the Alter Rebbe's siddur. I don't know if that's accurate historically, but there's such an argument. Where does hoidu fit into the middle of a mincha? We don't have hoidu throughout the week on mincha. Hoidu was instituted by the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov is the one that's put in the tefillah of hoidu on a Friday. So Nusach Ashkenaz won't have it in their siddur, and other siddur won't have it either. Nusach Sfard or Nusach Arizal, which follows the Baal Shem Tov, include this tefillah. The Arizal himself didn't say hoidu. It's only the Baal Shem Tov that started it. And why did he put in this tefillah of saying Tehillim Kapitel Kuv Zayin on a Friday? Because hoidu is a bracha of hoidah, is a tefillah of hoidah, of praise to Hashem. It's all the things that we daven to Hashem, of all the things that could go wrong, and Hashem saved us. In fact, the bracha of goimel, of benching goimel, is for 4 scenarios, alluded to in the words v'chol hachayim yoiducha selah. All those that are chayim, that are alive, yoiducha, praise Hashem. Chayim stands for choila, someone who was sick and is cured, benches goimel. Yud is for yam, somebody that went through the ocean, flew on a plane. The second Yud, Yisurim, somebody that went through suffering, which means somebody that was been in prison, more correctly, Asurim. If somebody's released from prison, they bench Goimel. And Mem, somebody that went through the Midbar, the desert. So that's what the Tefillah Kapitel Kuv Zayin talks all about, and it keeps on repeating, I think it's 4 times in Kapitel Kuv Zayin. Yoidu Hashem Chaslei, every time it describes a scenario, a dangerous scenario, I got out of the scenario, I'm thanking Hashem. So we're thanking Hashem that we went through Uvdin Nechil, we went through our weekday matters throughout the entire week, and that could actually harm us. It can harm us Begashmias, and it can harm us Beruchnis. We're thanking Hashem. Come Friday, we're safe and sound, Begashmias and Beruchnis. When Shabbos comes in, we're leaving darkness, we're going into light. We're leaving prison, we're going into freedom. We're thanking Hashem. The whole Shabbos is about Mizmir Shil Yoim HaShabbos Tov Loidus Hashem, to thank Hashem. So we want to start off Shabbos with a kapitel, which is all about thanking Hashem. And also because Friday, Erev Shabbos, is a time of tshuva, that's the time of doing tshuva. In fact, the Thursday night is when it starts the Avodah of Leil Shishi of tshuva. Tshuva is running out of jail, and this is our last chance of tshuva before Shabbos. Shabbos Oisi is Tashriv, about tshuva, and that's all among the reasons for this tefillah of the Baal Shem Tov instituted on Erev Shabbos. Some people say that Baal Shem Tov had a personal miracle. That when Baal Shem Tov was on his way to Eretz Yisrael, and he was in Istanbul in Turkey, and on his way back, he had to go back because his boat broke down, he was captured, he was saved, and he had a big nes, and to thank Hashem for this nes, a form of hagoimel, of thanking Hashem, he instituted this tefillah, which is a praise to Hashem. And there's such a story. So we're going to do the kapitel tefillah of hoidu, and it's actually interesting that Tzaddik of Lublin writes that we say thanks to Hashem with hoidu. We also bring a carbon taida, which is a carbon that's brought when a person also wants to thank Hashem, a Thanksgiving offering. That's in our Suda Friday night. The Rebbe writes that this tefillah of hoidu is our form of benching goimel. We're actually benching goimel, that we came out of prison peacefully, and we're standing ready for Shabbos. Shabbos, we're going to be free. Shabbos, it's supposed to be kol malachcha asuya, as if everything that you were supposed to do is all taken care of. Vasisa kol malachta, you're not supposed to think of work on Shabbos. It's actually according to halacha as well, not only not allowed to talk, but the right thing is not even to think about your work. So that's why we're benching this goimel by saying the kapitel of hoidu. There is a pirush, an interpretation from the Baal Shem Tov on the entire kapitel of hoidu. It is miyuchas. We're not sure it's from the Baal Shem Tov, but some people say it's ascribed to the Baal Shem Tov. It's found in Sefer Baal Shem Tov al HaTorah. If you want to look it up, it's in Parshas Yisrael. And the theme of the entire pirush of the Baal Shem Tov on this kapitel, Kuv Zayin of hoidu, is all about the fact that on Shabbos we're going to be elevating all the sparks from all the klippa. The sparks were in the klippa throughout the week. And on Shabbos, we're going to elevate them all. Now, we do not say this, we say this kapitel of hoidu on Friday, unless Friday falls out on a Yom Tov or Chol Hamoed. Why is that? The reason is very simple. If the idea is that we're coming out for weekday matters, if Friday was Yom Tov, or Friday was Chol Hamoed, it's not a weekday. So I'm not leaving Uvdin the Chol weekday matters. It's also a Gnai. It's actually not appropriate for Shabbos. You're thanking Hashem for Yom Tov. Sorry, you're thanking Hashem that I left Yom Tov and I'm coming into Shabbos. That's not appropriate. The Rebbe brings from Reb Chaim Noel of Ashalom, one of the Chabad Poskim of the last generation from Yerushalayim, that wants to say that not only we don't say it on a Friday if it's Yom Tov, maybe you're not allowed to say it. He actually points out an interesting thing. The Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur, Oimrim hoidu b'chol erev Shabbos. Levad, if it falls on, we say it on every Friday, except if it falls on a Yom Tov, she'ein oimrim hoidu. So the Chaim Noel says, why do you have to repeat again, she'ein oimrim hoidu, that we don't say hoidu? You said we say it every Friday, except for Yom Tov, which is on a Friday. Why are you saying except for Yom Tov when we don't say? Why do you have to repeat again when we don't say? So the Chaim Noah says, not only we don't say, he's trying to emphasize we're not supposed to say, you're not allowed to say then, it's not appropriate to say then. There's another pshat he wants to emphasize, we don't say hoidu, but we do say the prayer of Paschal Yo. So again, Yom Tov on a Friday, Chol Hamoed on a Friday, we don't say it. What about people make this mistake? If it's a Friday, which is Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, some people don't say, but that's not our custom. Our custom is that only if Friday is Yom Tov or Chol Hamoed, we don't say it. If Friday is also an Erev Yom Tov, we do say it. So Erev Shabbos, we say hoidu. Erev Yom Tov, we don't say hoidu. Erev Yom Tov, which is Erev Shabbos, we do say because it's also Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, which is also a Yom Tov, there is no point in saying it because we're not leaving weekday. There is a debate about Erev Pesach, which is on a Friday, because Erev Pesach is not Yom Tov, but it's a semi-Yom Tov. So we'll leave that. That's only relevant for years when Pesach falls on Shabbos, but there's a debate. I'm inclined to say that in such a case, we should say it, but let's leave that for right now. The Rebbe mentions that there brings from Sfarim that write that the minig is to say the tefillah of hoidu b'tzibur with a minyan. And the reason for that is like benching gomel. Benching gomel is supposed to be said by Sara with a minyan. But the Rebbe comments immediately after that, Lo re'isi mahadrim b'zeh, I never saw people being particular about it in our circles. I mean, there are other circles in non-Chabad Hasidic communities. They start off the tefillah of Erev Shabbos with hoidu loud. In some shuls, it's even pasuk by pasuk. But it's not, the Rebbe writes, I didn't see people being particular about it. We follow the tzibur maybe with our 10 koiches hanefesh, not with a physical minyan. On the other hand, there was a Rav called Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Hecht, who wrote to the Rebbe that he's considering he's coming to his shul, and he sees when it comes to mincha, they start with Ashri, they don't say karbanos. Comes Friday, they don't say hoidu, don't say Paschal Yo. He's thinking of instituting, we should say the whole karbanos as part of the minyan. And a Friday, not according to the Chabad custom. And Friday do hoidu and Paschal Yo as part of the minyan. See, because he wants everybody to say it. And the Rebbe writes, that's a good idea. Nochen hadavar. Betach nochen hadavar. It's for sure the correct thing to do. You don't want people to make mistakes. This is one of those cases. Normally we say that chadash asam and Torah. You're not supposed to introduce novel concepts. New grain is forbidden. And likewise, we borrow that phrase to say not to introduce our own new ideas. But in this case, the Rebbe writes, no, it's a good to introduce such an idea. If you have a community that see they're not saying karbanos, they're not saying hoidu Paschal Yo, so make it as part of the minyan. Okay, that's all about hoidu. There's a lot to say about it. Let me move on to the next prayer, which is in the Siddur. Not a very well known. Mincha Erev Shabbos, right after hoidu comes the tefillah of Paschal Yo. Some people say that actually this is a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Who came up with this idea? You should say Paschal Yo. Nobody knows who came up with this idea. You should say Paschal Yo on Friday and Shabbos. And it's argued that it comes from the Alter Rebbe. There's some Siddurim, many Siddurim, that actually have Paschal Yo every morning before Shachars. Before davening, they start off their tefillah every day with Paschal Yo, but it's not in our Siddur, it's not there. I was once with someone davening in an Alabama shul, and he was struggling. He couldn't find Paschal Yo in their Siddurim. And he asked me, where can I find? It's not there by Mincha. I said, look at Shachars. What's Paschal Yo? It's a section of Tikkunei Zer, a section of the Zer, called Tikkunei Zer, a separate section of the Zer, and it's introduction to Tikkunei Zer. And it describes what Paschal Yo and Eliyahu Hanavi said. It was a meeting between Reb Shimon ben Yochai and his holy group, his Chavrai Kadisha. They met up with Tzadikim in Gan Eden, and Eliyahu, and it says Paschal Yo opened up his drasha and what he started saying. And in this phrase of the Tikkunei Zer, he goes through briefly, and there's a lot of words that have a lot of depth and deeper depth, which goes through most of the Nekudas that Ramak writes, that most of the Nekudas of Kabbalah, all about Ein Sof, about the infinity of Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, Atzilus, the 10 spheres, all of that is all included over here by Kitzur Nimros. In fact, in Chassidus, there's quite a few Mamarim on Paschal Yo, which start off with the words Paschal Yo. There's an interesting, there's a sefer of the Rebbe Rashab, Hagoyis Ladibra Maskal Paschal Yo, that he wrote notes on the Paschal Yo that's found in Torah. And that sefer, the only reason we have that sefer is because someone stole it out of the Rebbe Rashab's room, and Bachram started copying it, but one Bachar didn't know this was stolen, and he went and asked a question after Maimer to the Friedige Rebbe, I believe, and that's how they found that this was stolen. But anyhow, that because of that theft, it became part of the Chabad literature. So there's a lot of Mamarim of Paschal Yo. It's all the stuff from Chassidus is always quoted from this Paschal Yo. There is the concept that we say L'Shem Yichud before davening. The idea of L'Shem Yichud is that one to unite the divine spheres. In fact, this is a very similar theme over here. Before davening, before Mincha, to unite the Esses with Ein Sof with Eibishter. And over there we describe that Hashem is beyond all these 10 spheres. Lav Mikol and Midasi Uklal. He's Chad, he's alone. The 10 spheres are there, that's how he conducts the world. What's the connection to Friday? It's not clear, but it seems like because Friday is the end of creation. So when the entire creation finished on a Friday, we're describing over here Hashem's Hashgacha, Hashem, the entire world comes from Hashem. Everything is only dependent on Hashem. So now when we finish the entire creation, Friday afternoon, it's all over, we want to make Hashem rule over the whole entire world to show there's nothing but Hashem. Also on Shabbos, we're going up to the higher worlds, to the higher chambers. That's what Shabbos is about. And this is what this talks about here also, about how all these higher worlds are. Eliyahu Hanavi, the author of this Pasuk Eliyahu, he was answered when he davened Mincha. That's why Mincha is one of it says a person should be extra careful with davening Mincha. The time when the unities happen in the world is on Shabbos, so Mincha Friday is an appropriate time. If you look in the Pasuk Eliyahu, there's the names of Hashem found in Pasuk Eliyahu. It talks about Hashem's name Shem Ma, and it says there right next to Yud K Vav K. Those letters Yud K Vav K. You're not supposed to say those words. You're supposed to look at the words. And in the Sidurim, I don't know how it's in the new annotated Sidurim, and the original Sidurim, those words do not have Nekudas. And often when there's no Nekudas in the Siddur, that means you're not supposed to be saying it. So that's about Paschal Yo. There's a lot to be said about that too, but I want to move on. Then comes the prayer of Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh is a song, is a piyut. It was instituted by the Charedim. Charedim was a rabbi in the time of the Arizal. They say that in the time of the Arizal was a beautiful place. Sfas was a beautiful city to be in because the rabbi of the community was the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo. The Rebbe of the community was the Arizal. The Darshan in the community was the Alshich. He used to give the lectures, the drashas. The Chazan was Rabbi Shlomo Alkavetz who made l'chadodi, and the Shamish was the Charedim. So the Baal Sefer Charedim, Rabbi Lazar Askari, he made the song of Yedid Nefesh. And if you look carefully at the acrostics of the word Yedid Nefesh, all the 4 phrases stand for Yud K Vav K. This is a special song, which is the Yavitz writes. Other writes, it's a song that inspires the soul to have Avos Hashem. And right as we're going into the Shabbos, we want to bring and inflame our hearts to Avos Hashem. The Mizritcha Maggid says that the tefillah of Erev Shabbos is supposed to say with extra hislavos, extra flame towards Hashem. So this is an appropriate time. We don't say Tachnun Mincha. It's a regular weekday Mincha, although it starts off with all these extra special prayers. But it's a regular Ashri Shemoneh, but we don't say Tachnun. Why don't we say Tachnun? Normally in Mincha we say Tachnun because it's said close to Shabbos. Normally we say it when we're ready to stop working, although some people daven Mincha early on a Friday and daven like the earliest Mincha possible. But since it's common that it's done when people are not working anymore, it's already close to Shabbos, so it's respect for Shabbos, we don't say Tachnun. Shabbos technically starts already, the Kedusha of Shabbos starts already, even according to Halacha from the time of Mincha, and according to the Arizal already from the 5th hour, which is even before Chatzos, 5th or 6th hour, there's the Kedusha of Shabbos. Any we don't say Tachnun then. Now, for a woman, the Tefillah of Mincha should be said before candlelighting, because candlelighting is a form of acceptance of Shabbos. Mincha is all about Friday, before Shabbos. What happens if a woman was delayed and it's time for lich benching? Now she wants to bench licht. If she's going to daven mincha, she might not be able to bench licht on time. So what she could do is she's allowed to make a stipulation. The halach is that a woman accepts, the custom is that a woman accepts Shabbos when she lights candles, but she can make a stipulation that she doesn't want to accept Shabbos. You're not supposed to normally make that kind of stipulation, only if there's a great need, but davening mincha is definitely a great need. It's a mitzvah, obligatory according to many opinions. So if she wants to be able to still daven mincha, she can make a stipulation as an exception to the rule that she doesn't want to accept Shabbos now when she's lighting candles, and then she can go right away daven a weekday mincha. even if she didn't make a stipulation, she may still daven a weekday mincha. Some people will say, no, you're not allowed to daven mincha afterwards, but there is no evidence that that's correct. It's a lechatchila thing that it's not proper to daven mincha after you lit candles. But after the fact, there's a lot of strong arguments to say that a person is allowed to daven mincha even after they lit candles. But of course, if they didn't daven mincha and it's already night, and if she's a woman that always davens mincha, so if she misses out mincha, the halach is that you daven twice ma'ariv. In this case, it will be two tefillas, two Shabbos digit tefillas. After mincha comes the next tefillah of Shabbos, which is the tefillah of Kabbalah Shabbos, which is a fascinating history. The tefillah of Kabbalah Shabbos we only say on Shabbos. Other Yom Tov we don't say Kabbalah Yom Tov. Yom Tov, we make Yom Tov holy. Mekadesh Yisrael v'azman. Bezdin is the one that sanctifies the month, so we made it to begin with holy. Shabbos, we say Mekadesh HaShabbos. We don't say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Shabbos. Shabbos comes on its own. Shabbos doesn't need Bezdin. It's Mikatcha V'Chaim, it's standing there holy. So we want to show we're accepting it, and therefore we say special praise of accepting Shabbos. We don't find Kabbalah Shabbos in Chazal. There's no tefillah or pi that was said during Kabbalah Shabbos. What we do find, the Amiroyim would say a couple of words to show they're accepting Shabbos. So, for example, the Chanina would put on very nice clothing on Friday afternoon, and he would say, the Gemara says, Shabbos, let's go out and greet the Queen Shabbos. Rabbi Yaneh would put on a nice coat and say, Chala, come over here, Kala. So that's all that we have. We'll talk about it. I would love to continue the shir next week. It was mentioned that this is a one-off. I mean, this is a very exciting topic. So if we continue this topic next week, we'll talk more about the history of the Kabbalah Shabbos and halachas associated with that. Kol Tov.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Braun. And now for our next class, we are excited to continue our series of Tznius and boundaries in the workplace with Mrs. Sara Morozow. Remember, even if you're not in a situation where you're working with men, we believe this series will be interesting to you. We'll explore a sensitivity that we can all learn from to create and foster healthy and wholesome environments in the spaces around us. We are so grateful to have Mrs. Sara Morozow in our program again. Mrs. Morozow is a well-known Kala teacher and mashpia to many. Thank you so much for being on our program tonight.
And now let us continue to the next thought. In every relationship, there are two partners. We have the mashpia, the initiator, the provider, and the makabel, the receiver. For example, I am teaching you, and you are tuning into me. So we are in a relationship. However, when I talk to the wall or to one of you who fell asleep, the wall or the sleeping student is not receiving what I am offering. So there's no relationship between me and the wall or the sleeping student. There's no transfer of energy between both of us. The reverse is true as well. If you're looking at the screen with your sound and videos on, and my speaker is off, and my sound is not working, and you don't hear me talking, even though you are ready to receive, there's no teacher-student relationship. There's no mashpia, there's no transfer of energy. So we need both a provider and a receiver to be in a relationship. We need a mashpia and a makabel. To take this a step further, have you ever tried to have a conversation with your friend, and instead of her tuning in and focusing on you, she's scrolling on her phone? What message is she giving you? That right now, she's not fully invested in a relationship with you. She's half listening and half not. Or if you are teaching a student or a young little kid, a little child, are their eyes and ears tuned into you when you're reading that book? Or are they wandering all over the place? A mashpia will invest in the makabel as much as the makabel is ready to receive. When the student is tuned in and open for that transfer of energy, the mashpia, the teacher, will teach even more. But when one on the receiving end is tuned out, then the provider, the initiator, will stop because there's no one to talk to. So a mashpia and a makabel will be in a relationship on the level and the extent of the open space that they create between them. When I interact with others, I need to think, am I creating an open space between us to give or receive energy? And if so, what type of open space am I allowing between us? Is this going to be the working relationship type of open space, or this already is opening a bit more or even more to create that type of closeness that is actually inappropriate between men and women. What vibes do I give up? Do I give off? Because how we set that boundary will affect the interaction with the other. Now, next point, we can only be responsible for our behaviors and actions and the type of boundaries that we put in place, both as a giver and as a receiver, both as the initiator and the one on the receiving end. In normal circumstances, the one on the other side of the boundary, will mirror our own energy. My job, both as a mashpia and a makabel, is to set the right boundary around myself so the other will get the appropriate message of what type of space I'm allowing to flow between us. What type of energy am I allowing to flow between us? So far we established that Torah boundaries are positive and healthy, referred to the previous class, and that boundaries set by Hashem provide calmness and security. Now, when we create the proper vibe, automatically this will reflect the other person's behavior. The next point I want to discuss is about our emotions. Creating boundaries requires da'as. Da'as is the objective thought process that connects to the practical details of the dilemma we face. We employ our minds to figure out the equation. We turn to our mashpia, we turn to our Rav for guidance based on facts that we collected in an objective way. Of course, we have to turn into our emotions to clue us into the subtleties of the relationship at hand. What does this make us feel? What does it make the other person feel? Those are clues that we gather together. However, emotions themselves have no role in the final decision of what boundary is necessary in this particular situation. The decision has to be made based on da'as, based on the right thought process in consultation with, of course, the mashpia and the Rav. Because when a boundary is created from an emotion, the vibe that we give off is that our boundaries can change anytime our emotions change. For example, our moods, our personal struggles, our ego, our social expectations, competition at work, a desire to please, and many other factors, which are all emotional factors. So instead of reflecting inner clarity and calmness, these emotions will create a tension between the two. Another point, the dynamic between you and those around you can become personal if the boundary is dependent on emotions. Instead of a simple practical and factual boundary, the emotional investment may invite confusing energy and may risk more entanglement between the two parties rather than the healthy space that we're trying to create. Remember, the goal is that the halachic boundary maintains shalom and positive working relationships. So to review, Torah created boundaries are positive. Torah created boundaries generate calm and shalom and great working relationships. Number 3, the vibe that one person creates in a relationship is mirrored by the other person, mashpia makabel, and therefore reflected by both people in the relationship. And number 4, the boundary needs to be created and communicated using da'as, logic, not emotions, so that shalom can be maintained. So where does all this take us on a practical level? Here's a practical formula for creating and maintaining healthy Torah boundaries. Think the letter C 4 times. C, 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 and C. C is for clarity. Know the halacha, ask a mashpia or a Rav. And once you have that C of clarity, move on to step 2. C number 2 is calm and content. Be mindful and tune into your emotions. Are your emotions out of the way? Do you feel a sense of calmness and balance, a sense of contentment? Then move on to step number 3. Step number 3 is C for communicate. Communicate your boundary. Send the message first with nonverbal cues, body language, facial expression, and we'll give some examples after we review the halacha. If that doesn't work, then simple factual statements are needed. Planning is helpful in the beginning before this becomes more natural. Of course, In the beginning, you can feel awkward, but if you plan your words and when you're going to say them and how you're going to say them, it will have the desired effect without getting emotions in the way. And more on this later in the series after we study the halacha. Once we have clarity, we have calmness and contentment, we communicate those boundaries. C number 4 is consistency. We must be consistent. Show that you mean it. Keep acting the way you need to do with that calmness and security. Of course, sometimes new situations come in the way and our boundaries have to be reevaluated, and we'll discuss this a little later. But consistency is important. So to summarize, Hashem's ways are ways of pleasantness. All Hashem's pathways are those of peace. Torah boundaries create peace and healthy space, not disunity and negative distance. Boundaries with shalom is the Torah way. Now I want to continue with some more chassidus, so we have the right mindset before we actually get into the nitty-gritty halachos. I suggest that you study Tanya, Perek Chav Zayin, and the Sicha of Shabbos Parshas Yisrei, Tov Nun Shin Aleph. You can find it in Teres Menachem. So here's something that we have to, a mindset that actually will be very healthy in our attitudes when we have to put a boundary that maybe make us feel a little bit restrictive, limiting, or uncomfortable. When we withhold from doing something wrong, our mindset is that all we did is we stayed away from doing something bad. Tanya teaches us something very novel. In a nutshell, when we withhold and we create a boundary, it's not just neutral. We're actually creating a space to draw down a higher form of kedusha, and let me explain. There are different types of kedusha that we draw down into this world when we make a dir b'tachtainim. To narrow it down in a very simple way, sorry, the phone keeps ringing and I don't know how to get it out of the way at this time. I apologize for that. So we have one level of kedusha, the lower level, that's called or pnimi. Pnimi means it's pnimius. It's very specific, and it comes down in a very specific way. The type of or kedusha that's drawn down by doing a mitzvah aseh, a positive mitzvah, an action. Again, when we do a mitzvah aseh, a positive action, that draws down a specific type of ar pnimi corresponding to that specific mitzvah. For example, if I shake lulav, I make the bracha, I shake the lulav, I did a mitzvah aseh, we draw down godly energy, kedusha, into this world that corresponds to that specific mitzvah of lulav. Or if I bench licht, or I prepare for mikvah, whatever positive act I do, it allows me to draw down into this world that specific corresponding to that specific mitzvah. However, we are physically limited human beings. There is energy that we actually cannot access due to our limitations as humans. Though that type of is called makif. Makif means it's all-encompassing, it's beyond our reach. How do we draw down that into this world? Says the Eibishter, loy, abstain, withhold, don't, step back. When I actually place that boundary and I respect it and I step back, I withhold, I don't, it's not just staying away from negativity. It actually creates that vacuum, that extra space where higher form of kedusha or makiv is drawn down into this world. And I want to give you another example. Did you ever get a compliment that insulted you? Did anyone ask you ever, oh, did you just lose weight? Or, Mrs. Morozow, your shaitel looks gorgeous. Now, you think it's a positive thing. It's a compliment. Why is it that it can leave us with uncomfortable feelings? Because even the most positive thing still is limiting. You're saying it's this and not that. Mr. Morozow, your shaitel looks good today because for the last 20 years, it looks like a flop. Finally, it looks good. I have something to talk about. You wouldn't give the same compliment to Mrs. So-and-so. Her shaitel is always looking gorgeous. So even when we give a compliment, it's limiting. We compliment the Eibishter. There's a mitzvah to speak about Hashem's greatness. Hadibur, Hagadol, Vanoira, Kel Elyon, all type of compliments. But sometimes to the Eibishter, we have to say, L'cha Dumia Tehillah. The greatest praise I can give the Eibishter is by actually keeping quiet, because there's no way that I can describe Hashem's greatness. Hashem's greatness is way beyond. The same thing here. There are mitzvahs that we do that we connect to a limited form of godly energy, of Elokus, of Kedusha. But then there's Kedusha that's much higher than that. It can't be specified. It's non-specific. It's way beyond. How do we access and connect to that type of energy? By actually withholding, by holding back and letting the Eibishter step in and pouring into this vacuum or this empty space the higher form of Kedusha. So when we set that boundary between men and women, and we think that it produces awkwardness or negativity, or we feel bad when we withhold it, when we don't shake that hand, when we don't attend that company party, we feel that, and because halacha says so, instead of focusing on the negative energy, we should say, wow, here I have an opportunity that I could have and I didn't. I withheld, because this is drawing down around me and in my environment a higher form of Kedusha that the Eibishter wants right now to come into this world. And the more opportunities we have to withhold, it creates those opportunities for a higher level of Kedusha to come into this world. And in fact, in the in Tanya, Perek Chazayin, the Alter Rebbe discusses this. Every time we push away something negative, or negative thought, a negative speech, or a negative action, and we withhold, it creates a delicacy, a more delicious type of dish, because we took this negative energy and we created an opportunity to draw down something higher. And in Perek Chazayin, actually, I want to end off with this. The Alter Rebbe finishes something with a very beautiful saying. It says, "V'yiskadishtem," if you make yourself holy, v'hiyisem kedoshim, then you will be holy. So we can see this on two levels. That if we put on our effort to do the right thing, to take the right steps, to draw down kedusha into this world, what is the result? V'hiyisem kedoshim, Hashem will help us. Hashem will help us, that we will be able to fulfill our goal of maintaining the right boundaries between men and women in order to protect Kedushas Am Yisrael. Another point I want to mention, and that's not talked about specifically in this Perek Tanya, but it's talked about elsewhere, that we're here in a community. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. We're all responsible one for another, and all of us actually can have a positive effect on each other. When we create those healthy boundaries and we withhold or abstain or pull back, and that makif, that higher form of of godly energy, is drawn down into this world, it's not only koiches that benefit us and individuals, it actually creates an abundance of a higher form of Kedusha that all of Am Yisrael could benefit from. This is a gift. This is a benefit, not just to us as individuals, but actually to the entire world, to the entire world. I want to end off with one more very important point, that sometimes we feel that we live in a world that the boundaries between men and women are so blurred to the point of almost non-existence. How in the world can we have the energy to actually uphold the right boundaries? It seems almost like a impossible task. And behaviors or things that we see nowadays is very different than what we have seen in previous generations. So every generation does have their own nisaying. Every generation does have to work harder on specific mitzvahs. And we do have to acknowledge that nowadays, yes, it is way more challenging. At the same time that is way more challenging, it actually forces us to actually dig deeper. There's a Orach Chaim HaKadosh, explanation of the Orach Chaim in Vayikra, in the Parsha of Arayos, Perek Yud Ches, in Achri Mos, a very long Orach Chaim. And the Orach Chaim actually talks about this, that how can us, human beings, have control and actually keep those boundaries properly, al pi halacha. And actually, the Archaim says that Jews and non-Jews are very different this way. That it's true for non-Jews to actually uphold the proper boundaries is perhaps next to impossible. How can it be that Yidden actually not only can, but they can be very successful in upholding the boundaries? Torah gives us the recipe. Torah gives us the formula. And the Archaim mentions three things. I'm not going to say in particular order. Number one, we have to be careful to follow the halacha of not looking where we shouldn't. Because when we guard our eyes and we protect what we see, it helps us not only what we see, also what we think. When we don't place ourselves on purpose in situations where we have to engage in scenes and sights that make us think about inappropriate images, that will help us to actually keep the boundaries. Now, sometimes we have no choice. We're put in a place where they're just in front of our face. We have no choice. Then we go to the next steps that we're going to talk about. Guarding our eyes and being mindful of where we choose when we do have the choice, that is a step number one in helping us actually maintain the right boundaries. Step number two is to be mahadir in what we eat. There's a correlation between kashrus, what we feed our bodies, and our ability to activate the koiches that we need to maintain these healthy boundaries. Example over there is just like herbs activate different physical reactions in our body to optimize our physical health. So too, kashrus does optimize our spiritual health when it comes to these matters. But the ikar focus, the main focus I want to say is that the Arachai mentions that we have a neshama, we have a koyach eloki. And with our humanness, it will be impossible to uphold. But when we tap into our neshama, when we are consciously aware and are in tune and talk to our neshama and let our neshama shine and feed our neshama the food that it needs, then when our neshama is activated, this gives us the koiches to uphold these boundaries in a very real and positive way. Thank you. And in Mitzvah Hashem, next time we can dig and dive straight into the halachas.
Thank you, Mrs. Morozow. And for our next class on Kashrus, tonight we will be continuing part 2 of our series, Within Harmful Foods. Is there such a thing as dangerous drinks? We'll find out more with Rabbi Nissan Zibell. Rabbi Zibell is the Kashrus administrator at the RCF, Rabbinate of Central Florida, and delivers classes to the general public on various kashrus topics. He is also highly active in answering consumers' kashrus questions on a daily basis. Thank you very much for being part of our program tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, and a good evening. We're going to be covering harmful foods, part 9, and within harmful foods, the topic of dangerous drinks, part B. Last week, we began discussing various dangers that can be associated with drinks and liquids that we consume. We discussed in detail water that remains in a metal vessel overnight, or any liquid that has water in it that remains in a vessel overnight, and the dangers associated with that. And this week we're going to continue discussing other drinks that could have potential dangers, whether it's physical dangers or spiritual dangers. We'll discuss everything in detail, and if it's applicable and how it's applicable. Just two things to mention about last week's topic regarding water or any other liquids that has water in them that was remained in a metal vessel overnight. First of all, what does it mean overnight? The Lashon Halacha says sha'avar la'im alayla, that the night passed over them. Some explain that it has to be the entire night, that from nightfall all the way till the morning, it was in a metal vessel. But if it was only half the night, then it would be fine. Others say no. Even if part of the night, if it was spent part of the night and then became day, that's also called passing the night, and is enough to make it a danger. And there are different approaches, and if someone has a question, they should ask the Rav which approach they should follow when it comes to that. One more thing is when the Alter Rebbe mentions this danger, he also said it applies to clay neser, which means utensils made out of neser. The Shulchan Aruch translated, that's printed by Kahas, translated by Sechs in English. Right in there, they translate Neser as clay vessels. However, it's not so simple that it's referring to clay. There are very many different opinions what Neser is. Some say it's a sodium hydroxide material. Some say it's alum. Some say it's chalk. All these are not materials that are common anymore to be used in the kitchen. But there isn't any authority that says it's clay, which clay may be used at times. So clay Neser is something that's a material that's not used. So therefore that's why we don't hear about it. It's not addressed. And we only address the ones that are remained in metal vessels, which is something that's still commonly used. So now to continue to the next dangerous drink that is brought down in halacha and various poskim is the sakana, the danger of gilui, of a drink that remained opened, uncovered. To give a little background, this is brought in originally in Maseches Trumas and as well in Maseches Avodah Zarah. In the Gemara discusses that drinks that remained opened for a very short amount of time, whether it's by day, whether it's by night, one is not allowed to drink that drink because it becomes a danger to one's life to drink it. What's the reason? The reason is because a poisonous, venomous snake could have come and taken some of that drink, and as it drank, it left some venom in there. A person who drinks it would basically be chas v'shalom die because they're ingesting venom. So this is, first of all, off the bat, clearly a physical danger, a medical danger, not a spiritual danger. It's specifically something that's a physical danger. And the Gemara says that's the reason. Now, therefore, how much time? The amount of time that if there was a snake around in your kitchen, or if it was wherever it was next to the drink, it could go over and take a drink without you noticing, which some say could be in less than a minute. Some say it could be a few seconds. And that's the halacha. I mean, that's brought down in halacha, but there's a big caveat. The caveat is, since the Chacham gave us a reason, and it's not a spiritual danger, in places where there is no snakes, there is no concern for this. So this halacha only applies in places where there's a concern that a snake will be in the house and is going to be able to come drink from it. So these days, in most places, even if there are snakes around in the wild, to say that there's snakes commonly found in people's houses enough that there is a concern that the snake may have drank, poisonous snake may have drank from the drink is very small. And therefore, in most places, this halacha does not apply, and this danger does not apply. And we see this as well in the Shulchan Aruch. It brings that already, that this danger doesn't apply in places where it's not common for snakes to be found in houses. And we find it as well in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch by the laws of Kiddush. What's interesting, the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this halacha at all in the laws of Shmiras Guf Nefesh, the laws of danger, being careful to watch ourselves from danger, because where the Alter Rebbe lived, there was no snakes around. It wasn't relevant. This halach wasn't relevant, so the Alter Rebbe didn't bring it at all. The Alter Rebbe brings it as a side point in the laws of Kiddush, that when it comes to wine of Kiddush, the Alter Rebbe says if the wine was left uncovered, so first of all, he says there's no issue in regards to this issue of gilui, of the sakana of gilui, the danger of gilui, because today there's no snakes among us in our houses, and therefore we don't have to be concerned at all with that. When it comes to Kiddush wine could become invalid for Kiddush if it remains uncovered for a significant amount of time. Some say overnight, some say less. That's a whole separate discussion. That's not something we're discussing now. And he says, therefore, for Kiddush, if the wine was uncovered for a significant amount of time, that would make the wine invalid for Kiddush. But regarding danger, there's no danger since there is no snakes around. So we see from that clearly as well that the Alter Rebbe doesn't hold there's any concern for that. Now, there are people still that are concerned with it, because there's a shla that's brought down in the Pischei Tshuva, one of the commentaries in Shulchan Aruch that brings down halacha. And he mentions some of the shla that one should still be careful if something was uncovered, especially if it was at night. So therefore, based on that, some are still have the careful if something was uncovered, especially if it was uncovered overnight, they will refrain from it. But really, in essence, This danger applied both by day and both by night, and apply even for a few moments. And that definitely doesn't apply today, as we don't have snakes. And if someone wants to follow that opinion of the Shla, that one should be extra careful, they should speak to their Rabbi, see if it's something that they should be following and how to apply it. Now, some go to the extent that they will even be careful not to wash their hands, like Nagavasser, with water that remained overnight, because possibly of that original danger, that maybe a snake drank from it and now there's venom, and you can wash your hands and maybe you get venom on yourself, which could be dangerous. But as we mentioned, there's no, according to Alter Rebbe, there's no need to do that, and there's definitely no need for within Chabad to have any reason to be concerned to such an extent that one would need to cover their Negavas or water. Now, which drinks would this apply to if someone is being careful? This only applies to water, wine, and milk. That's the only thing it applies to. In their original state, if their tastes changed, for example, if the wine was mavushal and got cooked, that already makes it that it's not any more danger. And the Rambam as well adds that it applies to honey as well. Outside of that, it does not apply to any other drink. So the moment you mix something into the water, that already wouldn't even apply to that. Fine, that's that. That's the sakana of gilui, the danger when it comes to a drink that was uncovered without someone watching it. And we'll now move on to the next danger that could be applicable when it comes to drinks. The next danger is what's called mayim raim, dangerous contaminated waters. And this applies to all water that someone is going to drink, no matter what the water, I mean, all plain water. And this all begins with a Gemara that discusses that story, how an Amir went to go get water and was waiting, and we're not going to get all the details, but we see from that story that we have a concern that Shin Dalids, we call them in English demons, Shin Dalids, could have drank from the water, and therefore if one drinks after Shin Dalid drank from the water, it could spiritually be harmful to the person. So how do we fix that? We fix that by spilling out a little bit of the water from the whatever it is, the bottle or the cup, and then that removes that danger of the possibility that some trace that was left from this shindalid, which can be harmful to a person if they would consume it, that gets rid of that sakana, of that danger. And the Alter brings this halacha in the halachas of Shmiras Haguf HaNefesh in Seif Dalid. The Alter brings, and we'll share briefly the screen just to see it inside. The Alter brings here, Vafilu Bayoim, even if it's daytime, Tzarich Lishbech Me'at Min HaMayim, one has to spill a little bit out of the water, Kodim Shisha, before they're going to drink. Why? Lefish Yesh Mayim Araim, because there is bad waters in there. From where these bad waters come from, Sheshasu Mehem HaShedim, that Shin Dalids drank from this water by Nahar in the river. And this is the way to fix these waters, to remove this bad spirit that's in them, that's harmful, that's dangerous, is by spilling out a little bit of this water. Now, although the Alter Rebbe mentions it throughout the generations, it's not something that people kept or really adhered to. Although we do know that the Rebbe was careful regarding this, and the Rebbe would spill out a little bit of water before he drank water, or also by seltzer, which seltzer is basically water with fizz. And even by mayim achreinim, before washing, the Rebbe would wash his fingers and lips. By mayim achreinim, the Rebbe also would spill out a little bit of water from the mayim achreinim before using it. And the Frierdiker Rebbe as well, we know, was careful to do so. Now, the Pri Chadash, which is a commentary on halacha, brings that since most people are not careful with it, one does not need to follow it or keep it. There are those as well that mention that since we have a tradition that the Baal Shem Tov got rid of shindalids, therefore today there's no shindalids. We don't have to be concerned that this water may have been, this shindalid may have drank from it, and that could be another reason why many people don't keep it. And practically speaking, some Rabbanim will say it's a nice thing to take on. Some will say there's no need to take it on. And the Kaf HaChaim mentioned something interesting, that if someone does want to take it on, he should not make it obvious that he's what they're doing. It should be spilled very casually, because this is something that's so many people don't keep. To take it on or to show off in public, so you're doing it could be a bit of showing off, and therefore one who does do it should do it in a very discreet way that does not call for any attention. As at times, spilling may not be necessary, even if one lightly taps their finger on top of the cup and gets a drop out with their finger, that is fine, and that would as well do what needs to be done. The next dangerous drink which we'll cover is froth that forms on top of drinks. There's the Gemara in Maseches Chulin that mentions that froth or foam that floats on top of a drink is harmful and is dangerous. The Gemara doesn't explain if this is a spiritual danger or physical danger. It just says that it's harmful and dangerous to one's nose and to one's mucus, basically. It could be harmful, which seems like it's a physical danger. The Gemara, however, continues that if one blows off the froth with their mouth, it can cause the harm to their head. And if one pushes the froth to the side, it can cause them to have poverty. So you have no choice. You can't drink it, but you can't get rid of it either. What do? So it says the best approach, the proper approach, is to just wait until the froth subsides on its own, and then one can drink this drink. And the Alter Rebbe as well brings this halacha. This halacha is brought by various poskim, and the Alter Rebbe as well brings this halacha. The Shla adds that this halacha applies even if the froth came from pouring. That because of the pouring, it caused some agitation. That caused the froth. That's also a froth that one needs to be, or foam that one needs to be careful to avoid. So practically speaking, modern day application, what does that mean? Many times if a person will be drinking a coffee, they'll froth their milk and they'll have a froth on top. Does that mean they have to wait till it subsides? Or if someone does a milkshake or a glass of beer, what do we do in such a case? Do we always have to wait for it to subside? How does that apply? So the poskim say that no, it doesn't apply when somebody actively agitated something till it developed froth. That's just a natural occurrence when shaking something. That's not something that's not the danger that the Gemara is referring to. Although from the Shla mentions it may seem that he says even if you pour it, the strength of pouring, they say that's not something that's not an opinion that we follow. Rather, this is talking about natural, something froth that's there naturally, which usually can be coming from a type of fermentation, and could be the fermentation, the yeast or the bacteria, whatever it is. The danger is if it's a physical danger or a physical danger that has also something spiritual to it, is basically that's what it is. But froth that came about or foam that came about from vigorous agitation or from frothing that was done, let's say for milkshake or for coffee and stuff like that, then that's no issue at all, and one does not need to be careful to avoid that. And that's the generally accepted opinion. The next thing which we briefly mentioned is the danger to drink water, then something called tekufa, which is a specific time period. It's brought down in Halach and Shulchan Aruch that one cannot drink water, that all water is dangerous during this time. It's called the time of the tekufa. Tekufa is the 4 specific moments which mark when the 4 seasons begin, the 4 seasons of Tishrei, Teves, Nissan, and Tammuz. And it is a very specific moment for a second or for a very small amount of time when that new season begins. that time it's a danger to drink all water. And again, this halacha is brought down in Shulchan Aruch. And one at that point should not drink the water. They should spill out the water that was around during that time. Practically speaking, there's many different details on this halacha, but practically speaking, most people today do not follow this, and therefore it's become the accepted approach that one does not need to be cautious, especially based on what we mentioned earlier, that when there's a spiritual danger, which this is a spiritual danger, if majority of people stop following it, that itself annuls the spiritual danger due to the idea of Shem Rep'sayim Hashem, that Hashem protects the ignorant. And when it comes to matters of Segula, the Rebbe mentions that the fact that most people are not keeping anymore, it also affects that spiritually it's not anymore something that's harmful. So practically speaking, again, most people in most places can say today one does not have to be careful, but if one wants specific guidance, they should speak to their Rav, and if they do need to be careful with it, they should be familiar with the various details that can be connected to this halacha of tekufa, and when it applies, and what it applies to, and how long it applies for, and how to measure the time exactly when these seasons, the moments of these seasons are. Thank you very much for having me, and good evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zibell. Before we do our conclusion of Tehillim and a Mashiach thought, we want to reach out to whoever is listening to these classes, and we're going to actually take a minute now to give you a chance to donate. Our classes are funded through personal donations, and we could use your help to keep them going. Right now, you have the chance to be part of the zchus in helping hundreds of women strengthen practical halacha in their homes. Please log on to mikvah.org/donate and contribute any amount. You can select Project Chana Power Hour to ensure your donation goes towards our program. Thank you. Okay, we'll just give you a few minutes now and then continue. As we come close to the month of Elul, we know Tshuva, Tefillah, and Tzedakah, Ma'avir and Esraya Gzeira. We know the idea is that our tzedakah can really make a difference in the coming year. So really is a very opportune time to give tzedakah. Okay, so let's put up coin in the pushka. I'm going to say the Rebbe's capital together, as well as capital Chaf for Eretz Yisrael. Shir HaMalais, LeDavid, Lulei Adonai Shehaya Lanu, Yomer Na Yisrael. Lulei Adonai Shehaya Lanu, Bekum Aleinu Adam. Azai Chayim B'la'unu, B'charois Apam Banu. Azai Hamayim Shetafunu, Nachala Avar Al Nafshenu. Azai Avar Al Nafshenu, Hamayim Hazeidoinim. Baruch Adonai Shaloi Nasananu Teref Lishinehem. Nafshenu Kitzipa Nimluta, Mipach Yoikshim Hapach Nishbar, V'anachnu Limlotnu. Ezreinu B'Shem Adonai, Oisa Shamayim Va'aretz. Let's all have in mind the safety of our hostages and all Yidden around the world. Lamnatseach Mizmar LeDavid, Yancha Adonai B'Yom Sara, Yisagev Hashem Elehei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezracha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka. Yizkar kol min chaysecha v'ailascha yadash nesela. Yiten lachachel vavecha v'chal atzascha yemale. Neranana b'shuasecha v'shem eleiheina nidgal yemale Adonai kol mishalaysecha. Ata yadati ki haishi Adonai mashichai yanehu mishmei kadshai b'gvurais yesha yeminai. Ele v'rechev ve'ele v'asusim v'anachnu b'shem Adonai eleiheinu nazkir. Hey makara v'nafala v'anachna kamna v'nis aidad Adonai Haishia Hamelech Yaneinu v'yom karena. Now for our Mashiach thought, the Rebbe said in Parshas Re'eh Tafshin Nun Aleph, the anticipation for Mashiach should be so powerful that one actually considers the Geula a reality. And when this happens, One should share this feeling with others, telling them that we can actually see the coming of the ultimate Geula. Quick reminders. If you appreciate this weekly classes, share them with your friends and family. All playbacks are available on mikvah.org/powerhouse and also on all podcast platforms as well as 24/6. Search us up as Project Chana Power Hour. If you have questions on the classes or would like to dedicate a week of learning in honor of or le'ilei nishma someone, please reach out to us on our email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. We look forward to seeing you again next week, and may our learning prepare us and our homes and bring every Jew home to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach now. Thank you for joining. Have a good night.